All right. Thank you for joining us. My name is Stephanie Garner, and I'm the program coordinator at Down Syndrome Indiana. I'm so glad you could join us for our very last session of our conference, Promoting Independence for Life. And I am struggling to get my screen to share, of course. And so give me a moment to try and make that happen. I'm going to try one more time. Nope, it will not let me share my screen. It should let you though, Carly, I think.
Okay.
So our conference, again, is Promoting Independence for Life, and we have Carly Shertino-Poulter with us tonight. And Carly is the Director of Advocacy for the Advocacy Network. She's amazing. I'm really glad you're here tonight, Carly. So go ahead and try sharing your screen, and let's see if this will work.
Absolutely. And I want to, Stephanie, I want to thank you for the introduction, but also I want to thank you and Down Syndrome of Indiana and your conference planning committee. I just want to thank you for inviting me to come speak to you guys tonight. So
we're grateful to have you.
Well, thank you. So as Stephanie was saying, my name is Carly Shertino-Poulter. I am the director of the Advocacy Network. And if you're not familiar with the ARC, we were established back in 1956 by parents of children with intellectual and developmental disabilities who wanted a better life for their kids, as simple as that sounded. But remember, that was 1956. That was back in a time where if you had a child with a disability, you were told to place your child in an institution. You were told, don't go visit because that would be confusing and cruel. And then you were told to have another baby as soon as you could so that you wouldn't feel sad. And our parents said, forget that. I'm raising my own kid. And they're going to go to school and they're going to have play dates and they're going to do everything else that their brothers and sisters do. So that's how the ARC was founded. Today, we are one of the leading advocacy organizations for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities of all types and their families. We are committed to progressive legislation and public policy to protect the rights and improve the services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I have to say that, the ARC is proud to partner with Down Syndrome of Indiana because we do that, on a regular basis, especially when it comes to legislation and public policy. And I am grateful for that friendship and that partnership. We are also home to the Arkmaster Trust, which is the state's largest pooled special needs trust, so that families and even individuals can set money aside without jeopardizing their Medicaid or their Social Security benefits. We are the founders of the Erskine Green Training Institute, and we are affiliated with the ARC of the United States. But in addition to being, the director of the ARC Advocacy Network, most importantly, I'm a mom. And I'm the mom of a 20-year-old son with disabilities and a 13-year-old son who does not have disabilities. So I'm living this too. And I'm right there in this with all of you as we're talking about things tonight. And tonight we're going to talk about guardianship and supported decision-making and least restrictive alternatives, but we're going to kind of do it in a different way. We're going to take it from a different perspective. So tonight, I wasn't planning on talking about, what is guardianship, what is supported decision-making, but more, I wanted to focus on restoring dignity and self-determination, and especially in doing those things by charting a life course. So we're going to talk about this from a different perspective. And I know that this is a controversial topic, and in part because it's a very emotional topic. So I want to have your permission to establish certain truths from the very beginning so that we're starting from the same place. So let me ask, can we agree that we're all here because we love someone with a disability? I think that's something that we can agree on. And can we agree that we are motivated to be here because we love that individual? That's why you're giving up a Thursday night, let's be honest. And, can we also agree that there is not one right answer or one wrong answer when it comes to guardianship or less restrictive alternatives, but it really depends on the individual and the individual circumstances. Is that something that we can agree on? Okay. And can we all agree that we're here with good intentions? Because I believe we are here with good intentions, even though this can be a really emotional topic. So if we can agree on all of those things first, it makes the conversation a little bit easier to have. And we're going to talk about things in new ways tonight. And I want you to have an open mind as we continue to talk about things. And I want you to think about things in a different way. And most importantly, I want you to go ahead and ask your questions. If you're comfortable speaking, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask, because I'll be perfectly honest, I know I wouldn't be able to wait until the end to ask questions, and I certainly don't expect anybody else to either. But if you're a little shy, and that's totally fine, by all means, put those questions in the chat box, and Stephanie will be monitoring that as we go along. So let's go ahead and get started. I do also need to say that this presentation is thanks to funding from the Indiana Family and Social Services Administration, the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services, and the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities. And they have adopted as their philosophy that all people are empowered to live, love, work, learn, play, and pursue their dreams. So let's kind of get into this a little bit. You know, as a society, we have a desire to protect people. We view it as our obligation to protect individuals when they may need additional help in life. That's true of children, that's true of seniors, and it's certainly true of people with disabilities. And when we're doing this, we tend to focus on providing the types of supports that we think are necessary. We often don't consult the person that we're trying to assist. And we also often don't listen to what supports they want in life. But the thing is, we do this out of love. We want to keep them safe. That's what's motivating us. We want to keep them safe from physical harm. We're afraid they'll cut themselves, so we don't teach them how to use a knife and we lock those up. We want to keep them safe from emotional harm. We're afraid they'll get made fun of, so they don't go to the school parties, they don't go to sleepovers, they don't join the community sports leagues. We're afraid of financial harm. We're afraid that they're going to take advantage. They're going to be taken advantage of, or that they'll squander their money. So we do all of that for them. And that's just it. We do things for them rather than teaching them how to do it themselves. And inadvertently, we wind up creating dependence and isolation. Now, that's never our intention. You know, we're trying to keep them safe. We're trying to protect them. But the accidental result is often that we create dependence and we isolate them from other people. And when we're trying to protect them and doing things for people, we wind up taking something away from them. You know, we want to protect them from physical harm. So we should teach them how to do things so they don't get hurt. When my son was younger, I was trying to teach him how to use a knife. And bless his heart, he cut himself every single time. And I knew that if I didn't find a way to address that, he'd never touch another knife again. So I got him this Kevlar knife glove. And literally, it's made out of woven Kevlar, the same thing that they make bulletproof vests out of. And so I made sure he put that on. That protected him from the physical harm, but that way I could teach him how to do this. And it's really only been, he was probably 14 years old. And I looked up one night and my husband was getting the boys' plates together for dinner. And I realized my husband was cutting up their meat. And he would have been about 14 at that point. And at the time I said, Scott, they've got to learn how to do that themselves. And part of it is, it's just easier for us to do it. But we've got to teach them how to do things for themselves so that they're not dependent on others. You know, we're afraid of them experiencing emotional harm. And that's just it. As parents especially, we want to protect our children from the world. We want to prevent them from experiencing any sort of emotional distress if we can. But that's also part of life, and we learn from that. So we try to protect them from emotional harm by protecting them from other people because we think they're going to be made fun of. But when a person is always included, they learn how to interact with other people. And more importantly, other people discover that people with disabilities are people. They like ice cream too. They like football and they like slapstick comedy and they hate the Patriots just like everybody else. Okay, maybe not. But by making sure that they're included from the very beginning and as often as possible, people realize that people with disabilities are people. We worry about financial harm, but instead of just taking money away from them and controlling all their finances ourselves, we should use a supported decision-making model to help them learn how to manage money and learn how to evaluate what people are telling them. But even as I say this, we're not pinning a 20 to their collar and wishing them the best of luck. We're still going to be there, and we're still going to be there to help. So instead of intervening and making phone calls for them, we coach them on how to make those calls, and we discuss what was said. Sometimes we do a three-way call so that we can be there. I'll be perfectly honest, I am never going to make my son call the Medicaid office. It's just not happening because it's irritating enough for me sometimes. That's why I'm one of his authorized representatives for Medicaid, so that I can help him with that, but we still talk about it. And I'm not my son's guardian, but there are still all sorts of less restrictive alternatives to guardianship that allow for me to provide support for him, but still allow him to make decisions too. Because the thing is, there is dignity in risk. We have the right to fail. Because let's be honest, we all mess up, all of us. And sometimes it's little and sometimes it's big. Sometimes, especially right now, we might go to the grocery store to pick something up and realize that we left our mask at home and we've got to run home to grab it before we can go into that grocery store. That's a little screw up. Yes, we failed, but you know what? It's something easily fixable. Sometimes the things we mess up are kind of big. And so we need to balance that. But the thing is, we all get second chances. People with disabilities often aren't given that right. If they don't do it perfectly the first time, they often don't get another chance to do it again, or they're constantly reminded that they couldn't do it. And that's not necessarily saying that families are necessarily the ones doing that. Sometimes it's families, and not with bad intent, but sometimes it can be families, sometimes it can be teachers, sometimes it can be providers. Well, you tried to cook and you set the smoke detector off, so you can't ever cook again. Okay, seriously? If that were the threshold, my mother would have never been allowed into a kitchen, because sometimes we screw things up. Sometimes we burn the toast. Sometimes I still remember when I was in grade school and we had gone upstairs to work on something. My mom forgot that she'd put the tea kettle on. We come downstairs, the tea kettle had boiled dry, and it was a smoke detector going off. We get to screw up. We get second chances. Nobody looked at my mother and told her she was never allowed to make tea again. We get second chances, and we need to make sure that people with disabilities get those chances too. Because we learn from our bad choices, and we learn from our failures. When I was in college, there was one Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, and someone called up, and next thing I knew, I had signed up for 5 years worth of Spin magazine, and I had to pay $15 a month for 2.5 years it was not just Spin magazine, but I had no interest in Spin magazine. Did I screw up? Yes, I did. And I'll be honest, $15 a month at that time, that was a big part of my monthly budget. That was almost 10% of my monthly budget. So that was a huge failure on my part. Did I learn from it? You betcha. My purse was never anywhere near my phone. So that if somebody ever called me at 8 o'clock again on a Saturday morning, that wasn't going to happen again. And I often hear from families as we're talking about these things, he just doesn't make the best decisions. You know what? There is not a parent of an 18-year-old on the planet Earth who does not feel the same way. And the truth of the matter is, our parents thought the same thing about us. And guess what? They were right too. Because 18-year-olds make bad choices. But you know what? They also learn from those choices. And so we need to let people with disabilities try. And we need to let them try again. And we need to let them try again. And we need to let them try again. We need to be there to help them make decisions. We need to be there to help them understand the consequences of those decisions, and especially those next steps. So that if they accidentally buy 5 years worth of Spin magazine, they understand that means they're going to have less money to do those other things that they want to do. And we need to teach them how to use a supported decision-making model to come to you and their support team first, just as a matter of routine and as a regular part of that decision-making process, but having them ultimately make the decision. So the first time I used supported decision-making with my son, or tried to use that more formal supported decision-making, because in all honesty, even though we've given it a special name, we all use supported decision-making all the time. The fact that you're here listening to this presentation tonight is a form of supported decision-making. You're gathering information, you're weighing that information to help you make a decision. You're talking to experts, you're going to wind up talking to your family and your friends, your loved ones, teachers or providers to help you make a decision on this. So that is supported decision-making. But the first time we did that in a more formal process, my son was a freshman in high school. And he came home from school with a paper about something called Elite Gaming Live. Do not Google that. Trust me, don't Google that. And he said, Mom, I want to do this. Can I do this? Well, I read this paper, and it's talking about how, people in the IT industry can be making $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 a year. And then it starts talking about how parents spend thousands and tens of thousands of dollars in travel sports fees. And of course, my first thought is, holy cow, how much does this thing cost? And so I'm reading over it, but the reality is my son had never asked to do anything in his life. So if there was a way we could pull this off, we were going to. But I started asking my son some questions about this, and he was getting more and more upset, in part because he didn't know the answers, and in part because he wanted to do it. Why wasn't I just saying yes? And so he's getting more agitated. And finally, I asked him, I said, Andy, what happens if they meet at the same time as your guys' night out? Because he has a weekly guys' night out through his waiver. That was the first time he paused. He goes, oh, I don't know. I said, okay, so there's some more information we need, right? He goes, yeah. I said, okay. And we sat down together and we made a list of 6 questions that we still needed answers to. That's supported decision-making, trying to figure out what information you still need to get. Then we talked about, okay, who can we get these answers from? And he said, and the first person he said was his resource teacher. I said, okay, that's a good person to talk to. Who else can you talk to? And he thought for a minute. And he said, well, the teacher who's in charge of the club. I said, okay, that's a great idea. So his responsibility was to go to school the next day and ask those 2 teachers these 6 questions. Now, I'm not a fool. I was not relying on him exclusively to get the answers to these questions. My husband and I sent an email to the teachers and asked them ourselves. But he came back with the answers to 2 of the questions, and considering that was his very first time doing it, that wasn't bad. And so we sat down and we talked about it, and it turns out that Elite Gaming Live was a school-wide video game competition that met 3 times a year, but the kids stayed until 6 o'clock at night, so they needed parental permission to do that. And it turns out he was right. It was free. And so, yes, he was allowed to do that. But we sat down and talked about it together so that we could talk about all the issues that were involved and all the things that we needed to think about. That's supported decision-making. But as we're talking about dignity of risk, and as we're talking about the right to fail, We've also got to think about those ethical considerations when it comes to failure. When do you allow somebody to fail? Well, start thinking about what is beneficial failure versus harmful failure. Basically, are they going to learn something from this? And is this going to be something that actually causes real damage? You know, having to pay for Spin magazine for 2.5 years, it's a beneficial failure because it's something small and it taught you to never ever do it again, versus deciding to play basketball in the busy intersection. That is a harmful failure. You know, what is temporary versus permanent? Those magazines, I was going to have to pay for them for 2.5 years, but it was only 2.5 years. It's not something that was going to last forever. What is inconvenient versus dangerous? It is inconvenient to me if my son wants to grow his hair, or it may be inconvenient if he wants a tattoo. It may not be a decision I agree with. I may think it's stupid, but it's not going to harm him. Dangerous failure would be, oh, I'm not going to take my heart medication anymore. That's not something that we let happen. So what is inconvenient versus actually dangerous? And we need to be there to bridge that gap. We want to be able to provide supports while they're learning to make decisions and while they're learning to achieve success. Again, they're never going to be alone with any of this. The question is, are they able to make some decisions on their own? And of course, where do we draw the line with that? And so we also need to think about protectionism versus guided self-determination, because self-determination is incredibly important. First of all, self-determination restores that perception of equality. Oftentimes when people with disabilities go to the doctors never talk to the individual. They never talk to their patient. They talk to the family or to the staff who came with them. It's the patient's life. They need to be talking to the patient and making sure the patient understands what's going on. And when they try to ask you questions or try to talk to you about it, turn to your loved one and make sure they know that. And it's interesting because medical providers, you can see their faces confused and then do a double take and then realize, oh, I guess I should be talking to the actual patient. But what we also see is that self-determination improves quality of life. There have actually been a lot of research studies that have been done. And one of the things we have found is that when people have the ability to make decisions about their own life, first of all, their reported quality of life is better. They are happier. And there's actually research that shows that people who have the ability to make their own decisions actually live longer in addition to living better. So self-determination helps give the individual purpose. It helps provide ownership in their life because they get to make decisions. And it also gives the individual something to work toward. And it prepares the individual for independence. And so that also sounds well and good. But I also want you to think about it from a different perspective. Take yourself. Imagine if all of a sudden you were no longer able to make any decisions about your life. If somebody came in and told you what you were going to do each day, what food you were going to eat, what you were going to wear, and you got no say in it, you'd be pretty miserable, wouldn't you? I know I would be, and I would not react well. And that's what we call behaviors in people with disabilities, or, I call it my Irish Sicilian streak in me. So, but, it's got to have a reasonable expectation. So think about it that way too. How would you feel if you were in that situation? But remember, we're always going to be there to guide that discussion. We want to recognize the individual's desires and try to help them find ways to achieve it. So one of the things that I will talk to families about, an example would be, a job. And they've got a son who wants to be an Army Ranger, or they've got a son who wants to play professional basketball. Well, those are not likely jobs. In fact, a person with a disability is not going to be able to join the military. But let's talk to them about why that's what they want to do, and see if we can adjust the options to still meet their desire. So you ask, why do you want to be an Army Ranger? Well, I want to protect my country, and I want to serve people. I want to protect people. Okay, those are great things to know. Did you know that there's some other ways to do that? The military uses all sorts of civilian employees to help with their missions, whether that's helping file things, whether that's helping shred paper, whether that's helping them, make sure their office is clean so that they can find the things they need. The Army needs all sorts of civilians to help them with their job. Maybe we could do that. Or maybe they want to be that professional basketball player. And it's possible for a person with a disability to be a professional basketball player, not when they're 5'2", or at least that's highly unlikely. But so you ask, why do you want to be a professional basketball player? Because I love basketball. Well, okay, so let's talk about that. Maybe you can work in a sports store and because of your love of basketball. Maybe you could work at the stadium. Or maybe you could be a volunteer coach for a youth basketball team or a volunteer manager for a youth basketball team, and you can work someplace else. But that way you can still work with your love of basketball. One of the other things that we hear a lot too is, people wanting to move out on their own. And you know what? I think that's something that a lot of people want to be able to do because, of course, that's the next step in life. And people with disabilities are no different. They want to move out on their own. They want to be adults. And instead of just saying no, or instead of saying, maybe in a few years, let's help them make a plan. Because that way they know that they're being taken seriously. But that way we can sit down and talk about what are the skills you still need to be able to live on your own. And you can start working toward those skills and they know what's expected of them. But you can also help identify resources and supports to help somebody live on their own. I'll be honest, my son is actually slated to go to the Erskine Green Training Institute this fall. And so he will be living on his own. And I've got to admit, that's not something I ever thought of as a possibility. So I'm being very supportive and I'm being very encouraging to him and hiding the fact that it is freaking me out, man. I got to be honest. I'm trying to be good, but of course I'm nervous about him living on his own. I'm worried about what people will think about him because he likes to, he talks to himself and engages in imaginary play. And yeah, I'm worried about it. But you know what? Instead of letting that fear be the driver in our decision, we're looking at what is it that he wants to do, and then we're making a plan about how to do those things. And we're also creating supports around him so that, when he's there, if he's got questions, he knows who to go to. He knows that he can call home. One of his cousins is starting Ball State this fall. So she's actually going to be close by if he needed something. And of course, the staff there would be willing to help with anything. Yes, I'm freaking out about it, but it's something he really wants to do and something that is important to him. And so I'm trying not to let that fear be the driving force in our decisions. And so one of the things you can also do is use something called charting the life course. Now, charting the life course was developed by families for families with the help of the University of Missouri Kansas City's Institute for Human Development and Missouri's University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, Education, Research, and Services. And yes, I read that verbatim because there was no way I could have remembered that. But Indiana is one of several states that is participating in the community of practice for supporting families of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And believe it or not, that's an actual thing. And it's something that's actually really important and something that has a lot of weight and status to it. And Indiana is using the life course framework to help improve the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the core belief behind life course is that all people have the right to live, love, work, play, and pursue their life aspirations in the community. Now notice I didn't say all people with disabilities. I said all people, because the ideas behind life course are universal. And so all people have these rights, including people with disabilities. And so there's some guiding principles with life course that assist individuals of all ages, abilities, and life stages to define what they want in life, and just as importantly, what they don't want in life. because sometimes that's an easier question to answer. To determine an individual's strengths, to determine what resources are already available regarding technology, community supports, relationships, and eligibility-specific programs, to identify a person's vision of a good life, and to determine the skills and resources needed to achieve that good life. So Life Course has all sorts of tools that they have developed to help people with this, because if you go up to somebody and you say, hey, what's your vision of a good life? That is so broad that you're not quite sure how to even answer that or where to even begin. Well, they've developed different tools to help with that. And you can get all of these tools at lifecoursetools.com. They have all sorts of materials. They've got videos showing you how to actually do these things. And the best part of all, it's free. And free is always good. So this is one of the tools that I like the most. This is called a life trajectory. And so here in this big blue square, we've got, what is your vision of a good life? And then down here in the red, what do I not want in my life? What are the things in my past that are helping me get to my good life? What are the things I still need to do to get to my good life? And just as importantly, what are the things in my past that are taking me away from that? And what are the things I need to be careful of? But you can say, what is your vision of a good life? And that's pretty intimidating, thinking that you've got to make your decisions for your entire life all at once. But these things are adjustable, and they're designed to help you with what you're needing. So maybe instead of what's your vision of a good life, it's what's your vision of a good first year of high school? What's your vision of a good restart to school this year with COVID-19 and virtual school, and who knows what's going to actually happen? So maybe you're making plans about that. What is your idea of a good transition out of high school and into the community? What's that going to look like? I sat down with my son when he was about 16 to do these. He was a junior in high school. And frankly, I was trying to talk with him about this to try to figure out what kind of job the kid would want when high school was done, because he only had about 2 years left. And so I called him downstairs to the dining room table, and I had these materials out, and I said, Andy, what's your vision of a good life? And his eyes got about this big, and he's like, I don't know. And I said, well, what are the things you want in life? Flipped his head around, I don't know. I mean, if the kid could have gotten up and run 2 counties away, he would have. But of course, he couldn't do that. So, but I knew that he was frustrated and intimidated and wasn't about to actually answer any of these questions. So that's when I started using them. I said, you know what my vision of a good life is? I want to go to the movies. His head snapped up because he was not expecting that kind of an answer. I said, do you want to go to the movies? Is that part of your good life? And he goes, yeah. So we wrote down movies. And I said, and I want to go to restaurants. My son does not care about restaurants, so we did not write that down. So I said, so what are things you want to do? What do you want to do in life? And he thought for a minute, and he goes, I want to go to GameStop. I said, okay, and we wrote down GameStop. And again, he was not expecting me to do that, because your vision of a good life sounds so much more important than that. But sometimes it's those little things that make life good. For some people, it's the ability to stop at Starbucks every day and grab a latte. Personally, I like my caffeine cold and sweet, so I want Coke Zero. I'll be honest, when the quarantine started, I made sure I had my supply of soda to get me through. I had been trying to cut down. Then quarantine happened and stopping soda just wasn't going to work. So we talked about what are those things we want in life. And we started off small with things like going to the movies and going to GameStop and making sure he could see his friends. But then we worked it back around. Okay, you want to go to GameStop and you want to go to the movies. You want to be able to do these things. What do you need to do those things? So you need money. I said, that's right. So how do you get money? And he thought, you need a job. I said, okay, well, what types of jobs do you want to maybe have? And so then we were able to pivot off of that to start having that deeper conversation of what types of jobs was he interested in? So tools like this can help. This is the trajectory is actually a 2-page tool. And so the next part of it is also what they call the life course portfolio. And so here in this big blue square, we've got, what do people like and admire about me? in this orange rectangle, what's important to me? And then in this white rectangle, how do you best support me? Imagine if you could fill that out. You've just created a cheat sheet for your loved one to share with people. How much easier would that make their life? And how does that help them make decisions and have control over their own lives and have that self-determination? So this is another tool that's helpful. This is called a developing a vision tool. And what's great about this is there are actually two versions of it. There's one for the individual here and also one for the family to fill out. And the reason that there are two of them, and I want you to fill out both, is because sometimes what the individual's vision of a good life is and what the family's vision of a good life is are two totally different things. And maybe you've never sat down and had those conversations before. That's what's nice about these is they break things down into the different life domains. So daily life and employment, community living, social and spirituality, healthy living, safety and security. But then they also ask some questions to kind of prompt some of those discussions. And so it's a great way to start those discussions. And the nice thing is you can use life course and you can use supported decision making and you can make sure that people are making decisions at any age. You know, it's never too early, and especially when it's also never too late to start those things, because we want to help people work toward independence. You know, I do think that as family members, you know, we want our loved ones to be as independent as possible. We want our loved ones to do as many things as possible. We want them to have the best life that they can have. And so making sure that they're able to have a say in their life is one of the easiest ways, one of the most effective ways that they can make sure they're having that good life. So maybe that's making sure that our services and supports are geared toward teaching those independence skills. You know, those self-care skills, those transportation skills, those financial independence skills, but definitely using assistive technology to help with that. So, for example, you know, when it comes to transportation skills, maybe that's helping them, you know, use the specialized door-to-door transportation that many counties have. And more counties have it than you'd expect. Sometimes, though, they have really limited hours, and so it's not that effective. So maybe we teach them how to use the general bus route, if your town has that. Maybe we're teaching them how to use Uber and Lyft. And that sounds absolutely terrifying. Let's be honest, that sounds scary. And you think, oh, no, they could never do that. Sure, they can. Part of it is we don't just say, here, go use this. We teach them how. We go with them using Uber or Lyft to get someplace. You know, we teach them how to use that app. And then eventually we transition so that they're doing it on their own. But that's when maybe you're using, you know, FaceTime, or you're using a video call so that you're monitoring what's going on while they're doing this alone for the first time or the first several times, or maybe just in general. And you make sure that you know, their Uber or Lyft account or their bank account or whatever it is linked to your phone so that you can monitor along the way to make sure where they're at. Maybe as if you're teaching them how to use the bus, you're using your phone to record the bus route so that they can watch that video and match up, you know, the bus numbers and make sure that all of the right landmarks are passing by. You know, when it comes to that financial independence, you know, let them have a debit card, but work with your loved one and work with the bank. So maybe you put limits on that debit card, that there can never be a transaction larger than $50 without prior authorization. Or maybe you can't spend more than $100 a day without prior authorization from the bank. So that you can call the bank and say, hey, I need to pay a doctor bill and it's $67. And say, hey, no problem. But that way you also make sure that, you know, nobody's convincing them to buy a car, for example. So there are also a lot of assistive technology pieces out there that can really help with this independence. I know when it comes to not only when it comes to living on their own, but just being alone at home, one of the big fears is, well, what if somebody comes to the door? Well, maybe that's getting a video doorbell so that if somebody rings the doorbell, you're seeing it on your phone to find out who's there. And some of them will let you speak to them through that. but you're teaching your loved one how to handle those situations. How do you react appropriately in those situations? Because you want to help your loved one be independent, and you also want individuals in the person's life whose goal is to help them be as independent as possible. So you bring in those family members, those friends, those staff members, those community members who want to help your loved one succeed and want to help them be independent, and make sure that they're a big part of their lives. There's some other really good tools from Life Course. This is something called the Exploring Life Possibilities tool, because down here on the bottom, we talk about what we've traditionally done in the different life domains when it comes to people with disabilities. And so, for example, in daily life and employment, that was sheltered workshops and day programs. But up here, we're talking about what resources are available now. So now we're talking about careers and competitive employment. We're talking about supported employment and job coaches and volunteering. And we're talking about a lot more because there are more opportunities than there have ever been. When it came to safety and security, it's always been about full guardianship and 24-hour supervision. But now we're talking about, those linked or limited or joint bank accounts. We're talking about, sitting down together and paying bills together so that they learn how to do that. We're talking about, different alternatives like maybe limited guardianship instead of full guardianship, or maybe power of attorney, or maybe just being an authorized representative for Medicaid, or different permissions like that, so that you're able to support the person, you're able to help them out, but they still retain the ability to make decisions and do things too. Here, these are integrated support options. This is also a 2-page tool that helps give you some ideas of what to put in integrated support stars. So an integrated support star is something that you can use with just about anything. And it's designed to help you think about what resources you've already got available and what resources you may still need to develop for different things. So up here in the blue, what are a person's personal strengths and assets? And the light purple, what relationships do they have that may be able to help? Down in the green, what eligibility specific programs are available? In the darker purple, what community-based options are available? And then here in the pink, what technology could help them out? And so this is an example star that Life Course put together specifically about daily life. And that technology piece really is key. And I'll be honest, when we first started talking about Life Course, and I would think about technology, I would think of those gigantic communication devices that Medicaid buys for people. I didn't think about the simple things like a calculator or a cell phone or an alarm clock, but those are all pieces of technology, all things that we use on a daily basis, but that make our lives easier, whether that's auto bill pay or auto prescription refill. Those are parts of technology that make our lives easier, but can be essential for the success of a person with disabilities. So all sorts of different options there. Here, we've got a sample star about community living. So maybe their strengths are that they know how to navigate the community, or that they have housekeeping skills, or that they can make simple meals. Maybe, those relationships that are important are going to be parents and siblings and aunts and uncles. It's going to be neighbors. It's going to be members of your church and other community organizations. What relationships do they have, and what relationships can they develop? Maybe part of it is making cookies, moving in someplace and making cookies for the neighbors to introduce yourself, and developing that friendship so that you look out for each other. Not only do we want to look at those eligibility specific things like waivers and centers for independent living and things like that, but we also want to look at what are those just community-based resources. And so maybe that's, the neighborhood watch. Maybe that's a homeowners association. Maybe that's a gardening club or something like that. It's all about developing those resources and those relationships. And so this is a sample of a blank star so that you can do one on your own. But the thing is, none of this is cut and dry. There is no right or wrong answer. There is no universal answer. It really does depend on the individual. And so we need to acknowledge the person's hopes and their dreams and their desires and the needs of that individual. We need to think about their life circumstances and their current abilities and the skills that they still need. We want to identify permanent, dangerous harm and look for ways to try and try again. And we always want to treat people with disabilities with dignity and respect, and that's probably the most important part of this. I will also say that one of the things we need to think about too is that the age of 18 isn't necessarily a magical moment because it's not like that is the only time you can make this decision. And the other thing is that you can always start with something less restrictive. And if it turns out to not be enough, you can always go with something more restrictive. So you can start with just supported decision-making and that's it. Or you can start with supported decision-making and, Medicaid authorized rep or healthcare representative or rep payee, but the person can still make decisions. You can start with power of attorney, which can be as general or as specific as you'd like it to be. And so it's easy to start with something less restrictive, and then if it turns out it's not enough, go to something more restrictive like guardianship. It is much, much, much harder to go the other way. So the thing is, we're here to help. If you've got questions and you want to talk about your specific situation, by all means, call us up and talk with one of our family advocates. We talk with families about this all the time. And the other thing is, we're all parents. All of our family advocates are parents, but everybody who works for the Advocacy Network is either a parent, a self-advocate, or a sibling. So we live these issues. We understand. And we understand the fear. We understand the desire to protect. And we also understand the desire to make sure that our kids can do absolutely anything that they possibly can. So call us, talk with us about it. But now I want to make sure that you can ask the questions that you have right now. So let's open it up. What questions do you guys have?
Well, Carly, I'll start us out. First of all, I could seriously listen to you all day. You need your own talk show or radio show or something, because
You are far too nice.
I just love listening to you. So thank you. And I really, really love this topic. I guess what I am interested in, I know a little bit about this from a professional standpoint.
Sure.
And so I've learned a lot about dignity of risk and how important it is for us to
And it's totally different when it's your own kid, isn't it?
Yes, that's my problem, right? There's so many issues that have come up that I know if I were talking to another parent, I would be encouraging them to really, to stretch the envelope, to think outside the box, to try something new. But man, when it's your own kid, it's hard.
It's hard and it's scary. And the thing is, it changes based on age, because I know you, I know your daughter, I know she is very young. And so, what you let them do at 6 and 7 years old is very different from what you let them do at 16 and 17 years old, which is totally different when they're 36 and 37 years old. So you're absolutely right. And I think that what I would say is, as hard as it is, as scary as it is, think about what is permanent harm, what is dangerous harm, and let that be your guiding principles there. If rather than get into a fight with your child about wearing a coat when it's 20 degrees outside, fine. You don't want to wear a coat? Don't wear a coat. Now, personally, I would take the coat with me, because as soon as they get outside, they're going to realize it's cold. And because that is such a low stakes thing, I would absolutely go, yep, told you so. Now, if it were something, not quite that superficial, I would not do the whole told you so part because, told you so. Nobody ever feels good when somebody goes, I told you so,
Well, except the person saying it.
right. So we do want to treat people with dignity, but sometimes we got to let them try, and we got to let them see on their own that making a peanut butter and sardine sandwich is, Oscar the Grouch may like it, but nobody else is going to, and did you just waste, $3 of ingredients? Yes. $3 is a pretty low stakes thing most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. So sometimes we gotta let them try it, even when we know they're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And that is one of the hardest things possible as a parent.
Are there things that you tell yourself? Like what as a mom, I guess I'm asking more from a personal standpoint, like what things do you tell yourself to kind of get yourself psyched up for, like, I can do this, I can let them try, I can let them fail, I can do it? How do you get through that as a mom?
I prefer to live in denial as long as humanly possible. So like I said, Andy's going to Erskine Green in October. I'm simply choosing not to think about it too much. I'm trying, we're having some of those fun conversations about, what are some things we need to take, and, talking about, things like taking, buying some bowls so that he has bowls for snacks, and, helping him think about what are the things he's going to need to take with him. But he's never been away from me for more than 2 nights in his life, in 2 decades. So yeah, I'm kind of living in denial here.
Hats
And
off to you, my friend. I guess whatever it takes, you're doing it. So good job.
so we will see what it's like when he's actually gone, and then I will be hiding it because I know my younger son's going to have a lot of trouble with all this. But you know what? I think it's also, I think one of the best pieces of advice that I can give is sit down and talk with your child or your sibling, or whoever your loved one is, and talk with them about things. When decisions come up, yeah, it's just a whole lot easier if I deal with it, but I know it's important for him to learn how to do these things because eventually I won't be here. And so, one of the things we're doing right now is we're battling with Social Security. So I'm making sure he understands what's going on. And so we talk about the situation and we talk about why it's important, but we talk about it in language that he will understand and broken down in ways that he understands. And that's probably the most important thing, is that oftentimes, and not so much from parents, but oftentimes, other professionals forget to break things down. So actually, let me use an example that does not apply to him. Oftentimes when somebody goes to the doctor, and sometimes we'll get calls about this, where, they're having trouble with their doctor because their doctor says that they're non-compliant with something, or the doctor doesn't think that they can that they're competent to make decisions. Well, my first question is, how did you explain it to them? If a person has an intellectual disability, don't use a word with 5 syllables, and also recognize that, especially when it comes to medical things, most people have no idea what in the world their doctor is saying. They're just nodding and saying yes because the doctor's saying it. You're only questioning it because it's a person with a disability. So make sure that you're explaining it in a way that they understand. I have a friend who, he has lymphedema. Yeah, because everybody knows what lymphedema is, don't we all? So what that is smarty pants. But so lymphedema is just, it's swelling, and it's pretty significant swelling. And the doctors told my friend that he should not drink more than 32 ounces of water a day because it would make the swelling worse. He did exactly what they told him. They told him no more than 32 ounces of water a day. But that's not what they meant. What they meant was no more than 32 ounces of liquid a day. But that's not what they told him. So he wasn't drinking more than 32 ounces of water, but he was drinking soda, and he would eat soup and all these other things. So they were looking at him as non-compliant, When no, he did exactly what they told him to do. The other time are things like, I had a call once about somebody who, the doctor was recommending surgery. She didn't want to have surgery. And the doctor was irritated because whose responsibility is it to make these decisions for her? You know what? She's got the right to decide she doesn't want a knee replacement right now. We have that right. you know um, you know you may have somebody who, doctor saying, hey, you need your hip replaced, and they're going to put it off as long as possible because they don't want to deal with surgery, they don't want to deal with rehab or anything else. And then eventually the pain gets bad enough and they do it, and then they kick themselves for not doing it sooner. But they get the right to make that decision. People with disabilities should have the right to make those decisions too, but they've also got to be able to make informed decisions. And making an informed decision means that you understand at your learning level what's going on, that somebody has taken the time to explain it in a way that is accessible, to use plain language, to maybe use visuals to help explain what's going on so that the person understands and can make an informed decision. And frankly, that's true of everybody, not just people with disabilities. What other questions do you guys have?
Anybody else have one they want to get asked?
I promise I don't bite unless you ask, and then it's negotiable.
Well, I'll let you guys think about it if you have a question you want to ask, but I'm going to go ahead and officially end the recording.
Okay.
Carly, thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Amazing. This is such an important topic that honestly, like, we as parents and providers, like, we can't hear about this enough and
Right.
learn about it enough because it's constantly evolving and needs to be evolving, and how we're treating our loved ones and
Right.
the individuals we.
You know what? And I know that this is a difficult topic, and it's a very emotional topic, and so it can be very vulnerable, and sometimes it's a matter of, it, people just automatically assume that when their loved one turns 18, they need to get guardianship. And I remember a few years ago, I was talking to my husband, and I was going off about something. And my husband goes, but we'll get guardianship of Andy, right? And I said, oh, we've never had this discussion, have we? Sit down, let's come talk about it. And you will never hear me say that guardianship is bad, okay? Because there are times guardianship is absolutely necessary, and I absolutely recognize that. You will also never hear me say that guardianship should always be used, because I think there are a lot of people who don't need guardians. Other levels of support will help. And guardianship is this weird dichotomy, because on the one hand, we have a lot of people who desperately need a guardian and don't have them. And the flip side is also true. We have a lot of people who have guardians who don't truly need them. And the nice thing is, the life course tools, as well as the ARC of the United States, have different tools available to help you figure out how much support does a person really need. And like I said, you can always start with something less restrictive. And if it turns out that it's not enough, you can always do something more involved later on. It's just extremely difficult to do the first.
Thank you, Carly. Like, such a great topic, and really are grateful. And thanks for spending your evening with us.